Hello, we are in March. It's March 5th, late at night. For some of you, it's already March 6th, for most of you, perhaps, by the time I actually upload this. Yeah, I don't know why it's taking me so long to record this video, and I finally did a reading for it using my spread, The Cave, which is like an old hermit inspired spread from back in the day. If I remember to, I will put a link to it. Um, but it's just sort of wondering, like, why do I feel sort of ugh? I mean, there's the world. There's Pisces season. The sun has just entered my eighth house. So like there's water in water, which is good, but it's also just, you know, ungrounded, untethered, flowing fluid, all of that stuff. When I look at the Journal of Threads, I was sort of surprised that it was the week of the soulful. Um, Not because I don't feel like I've been tapping into that archetype. I probably have in a lot of ways, some of which I hadn't expected to, or in different ways, but it just didn't, it felt more, it feels more diffuse this week. Like there's a card in the wild unknown animal spirit, the fish, and that's really the vibe that I've been feeling. And so, of course, that's fitting for Pisces, right? But the fish in that deck in particular is really just like going with the flow, but not in any meaningful way. It's not like a choice, it's more like lost in the flow. That's a little bit how I have been feeling. Um, I mentioned to some of you it's a shorter month, or when I posted the Journal of Threads, it was a shorter month in February, and so I was like racing to catch up, even though I had done a ton of prep work early on in the month. Um, and I think that some of that's just sort of carried through. I've had a bunch of like extra readings beyond the normal month ahead. Um, the workshop for Introduction to Scrying was right at the beginning of the month. So like there's just a bunch of stuff. And it was easy to like fall out of my healthy habits starting on Sunday. Um, and yeah, that just always takes me right out. Like I start eating garbage. I don't go to the gym as long, or I don't really push very hard, and I just lose all sense of energy and I don't know, just sort of like slink back into sort of the negative version of Taurus or sort of the lazy version of Taurus, which is not the same as self-care and rest. Those are important and healing and helpful. But just the like slug version of Taurus, which does exist. I often joke that people who aren't Taurus misunderstand Taurus as being lazy when what we are is highly inert. So if we're in motion, we stay in motion. If we are a slug, we stay a slug. And so this has been a week where I'm like fighting with slug, but also trying to take very good care of myself given a bunch of other things that are going on. Personal life with a bunch of like high intensity readings that I've done. Um, yeah, what else? I've had a lot of fun with, I mentioned the Introduction to Scrying workshop. This semester as a whole has been really fun. It's been well attended, larger enrollment this semester than last semester or the previous spring, I think. So second only to the first semester, which is really exciting, right? Because there's a lot of people who are involved. They're taking all of the classes. So they pop in office hours or they bring in ideas from other classes and sort of mix and melt them, which is the purpose of a semester of divination model. And of course, I get to know everybody a little bit better, or at least the folks who are showing up live. Um, and we can talk through different things. So one of the ongoing things this semester, particularly for the hard cards of tarot, is really thinking through justice and other cards that are like justice. I recently posted about how to read justice, and it talked about comparing justice and temperance, which is something that came out of last year's spring office hours. And this year, the same person who brought that up was curious about justice versus judgment, which I find to be very different cards. However, the titles of them are very similar. And so it can add a lot of confusion. But as I was explaining to them, and then as I was explaining to someone else what I had explained to them during office hours, uh, I realized that some of the things, or what's hard for a lot of people who grapple with these hard cards of tarot, is this idea that a tarot card has a single meaning. Like it means something. It means something different from what something else means. When in fact, there's a lot of overlap for these cards. They are distinct, right? They are not just redundant, but there are a lot of areas of overlap. Some of that happens through numerology, through elements, through astrology, through titles and concepts and stuff like that. So as I was talking to this other student, um, who was was sort of anti the whole astrology of tarot thing. Because as she said, like people will read temperance and they will say, oh, it's Sagittarius, not moderation. But temperance exists outside of its astrological association to Sagittarius. And so it's not that it's moderation and not Sagittarius, or that it is just Sagittarius and has nothing to do with moderation. It's that they exist simultaneously as different layers or different lenses. And for that same reason, the example of justice and judgment, they're both numerological twos, which is interesting, along with the high priestess, decision making, contemplation, sort of different moralities or different decision points, right? Things that are being weighed or sort of made into black and white, which happens in judgment, right? There is a decision that is made in the final judgment of Armageddon, which is what that card was originally effectively depicting, the revelation, uh, and all of that good stuff. But it is that and other things, right? And so there's the historical context of what was happening in judgment and that title, which may make it seem similar to what's happening in justice. Um, the student who asked about this mentioned Lindsay Mack from, I think it's The Wild Soul. I used to be more into her than I am now. And so, she had some really interesting points about the septenary system. And she sort of got me into like looking into that a little bit more. Tarot for the Wild Soul, that's what it's called. I knew I would get there. And right, so the septenary system, if you're not familiar with that, the first seven cards, Magician through Chariot, are sort of this like individual training ground where you learn sort of personal mastery through these different mentors effectively. And then the 8 through the 14, strength through temperance, that is another septenary, another set of seven that leads you from individual strength, and application of will to mastery of forces, right? Forces in life, forces between other people potentially. And then the third septenary, devil through the world, is mastery of cosmic forces or external events that are sort of superhuman. And it's a useful, broad categorization. I've written a little bit about it. I think it's hard to make a lot of sense of it at the sort of minimal, not minimal, individual card level. Um, that said, it's fun to try. The high priestess, the hermit, the tower, I've really understood sort of the meaning of uh, connecting to divine wisdom through all three of those. They're all in the same column, the second card of each septenary. right? And so, like, that's given me a new lens for understanding how those three cards can actually connect in a really interesting way. That said, the broad categories are typically more useful, and justice falls in the second category. And so it has this kind of interpersonal feel, whereas judgment falls in the final septenary. So it has this kind of cosmic feel. But the way that, um, and I think that that is a valid distinction between them and what's happening. That the justice is sort of negotiating between external parties, making a decision. Maybe it's an internal decision, but it's communicated outwards, but it's not cosmic. It is interpersonal for the most part. And then, I don't really buy into the like justice is karmic justice. That's what the Wheel of Fortune is for. Um, and the judgment card, right, is more cosmic, is sort of this like divine calling, but you feel it within. And so the student who was talking about Lindsay Mack and feeling like, oh, justice is more maybe like internal and judgment is more external. For those of you who are really familiar with justice and seeing it, the card justice, and seeing it as tied to institutions, legal decisions, all of that stuff, right? Like it's so clearly an external thing. Like it is, maybe it's decided by someone who is not you because you are not a judge or a legal person, right? It's happening to you. It's an institution or an organization or business, right? That doesn't involve just you. And so it doesn't feel internal. Maybe the decision making is internal, but like half the time justice is happening to you, you are not embodying justice. Um, and as opposed to judgment, which can sometimes feel like a spiritual awakening, which sure, it may be inspired by cosmic forces, but it is internal. And so I was trying to explain this distinction to another student during office hours. I realize I'm totally rambling, but you get to see the process unfold in real time. Um, right, this sort of like, oh, the septenaries are really useful for understanding the septenaries, right? Understanding one layer of the cards. But one of the reasons why justice and judgment then get so sort of muddy, even though the septenaries are usually quite helpful, but why someone may feel like, oh, but just judgment seems like so much more internal. It's an internal awakening, like being resurrected and reborn, as in the depiction of people rising from coffins in that card. Well, judgment is a fire card, right? Like it's literally elemental fire in the astrological associations of the Golden Dawn, or tied in a more modern astrological context to Pluto, the great transformer. And so fire, which is a transformative element classically, or like it has this transformation. And so even if it's coming from outside, it's affecting something else, right? As opposed to justice, which is tied to Libra, which is therefore an air card. Um, Air is interpersonal, right? You are breathing, you are communicating. Traditionally, the swords, which were the air suit, those were signs of like social status, symbol of social status. And so, like, there is this interpersonal element that is critical to pretty much all of the air signs and all of the air cards that makes it feel more external than maybe a fire card, which even though, there's a fire card, the sun is a fire card, the tower is a fire card, judgment is a fire card. All of these things may be sort of like external forces, but they hit us very deeply and personally, whether that's catastrophe, joy, spiritual calling, right? Like it affects us on the inside in a really tangible, powerful, transformative way. And so it's easy to sort of forget the cosmic source of them, which is what we would understand by the third septenary, and instead just focus on like, well, what does it mean to me, right? How does it feel to me? It feels very personal. And so the TLDR of this, the too long didn't read, is that like there are layers, right? So the septenary may be a useful frame of reference in certain situations. Maybe if you're looking at patterns of which major arcana are showing up, if you're trying to understand generally what distinguishes something like strength from the magician or um, the devil from the magician, if you're following that the first card in each of the septenaries, which are really interesting. But then the elements in the astrology, they provide a different layer. It doesn't replace, right? Temperance is not simply Sagittarius, even though that is that astrological sign, the Golden Dawn mapped to temperance. It is also moderation. It is also the historical Christian virtue of temperance. It is also all kinds of things, right? Alchemy, um, the mixture of wine and water, the mixture of fire and water. All of those things exist simultaneously because there's not just one meaning. I think of it, and this is the metaphor that came to me in sort of the space between the email that I got from the student and the office hours where I explained it to a different student. In that space between, I thought, oh, each tarot card is like a book. It's not just one word, right? It's not just a page in a book. It is the whole book. So asking a question like, what does temperance mean? Or what does justice mean? Or why, you know, does it feel like justice and judgment are the same sometimes and totally different other times? It's like, well, what does the Wizard of Oz mean? Depends on your frame of reference. It depends what you're looking for, right? Are you reading it or interpreting it as a reader from, the early 20th century? Are you interpreting it as a fan of the film? Are you interpreting it as a kid? Are you interpreting it as uh, a sort of populist economic theory? Are you interpreting it through the lens of Wicked, the movie, the book, right? Like, depending on how we're coming at it, what we're trying to see in it, what question we're trying to answer, essentially, a tarot card is like a whole book. It's going to mean a lot of different things, and they exist simultaneously, but not all of them are right answers for the question that we're asking, and not all of them are going to fit the particular perspective that we're coming to the card with in that given moment. And so that's really where my head has been, not so much on the Journal of Threads, which is not to say that the Journal of Threads isn't good. I spent a lot of time with it because there's an extra week in this month, um, in the month of March. Uh, and so I'm I have spent a lot of time with it. I've been thinking about it. I found today's trio of sample exercises really helpful. I've been really inspired by the body scrub, which I think was in last I think it was in the February one. Let me just look. Yeah, like make your own salt scrub or sugar scrub. I'm just searching through the PDF. Yeah, I think that was in February. Like, I didn't do that in February. But I was sort of thinking, right, like a lot of times the example exercises that I'm giving are really about the threads. They're not really related to the astrology, right? Some of them will be related more to the astrology, some will be more related to the threads, some will touch upon the moon phase. Um, some may tap into other elements. Obviously, the planetary day is important, but like anytime there's a green and a yellow on a Venus day, that's a good day for like making your own like lemon sugar scrub. And so I think there's maybe one coming up, or there was one recently. Um, because I prepare what I post on Patreon usually a couple of days in advance, sometimes a week in advance. And then I fill in the like daily guide, the message of the moment. But I'll copy and paste what I've created for the journal like longer ahead of time because it's fairly easy to do. Uh, Sometimes I get confused as to like what is happening which day. Um, yeah, I don't know if we have any green and yellow on a Venus day this time around. But anyway, I got really excited by the idea of green and yellow on Venus Day, as we had in February. I was like, ooh, I really want to make some like sugar scrub or salt scrub. And then I remembered this episode of Parks and Recreation, a delightful show, most of the time. And there's an episode where Leslie Knope, the protagonist played by Amy Poehler, makes salgar, which is sugar and salt together, and she like adds it, to everything because she's a sugar fiend. And I thought, ooh, a sugar salt scrub, like that could be great if you wanted to make a margarita flavored or margarita scented body scrub of some sort. So it got me thinking into all sorts of like delicious things. I'm gonna play with some essential oils, maybe make some fragrances. I know Maggie in our group has some experience with that, so I may be hitting her up for any advice that she has. And it reminded me of ordering some fragrances from Susie Cheng, who uses astrology and astrological tarot correspondences to make really interesting scents. I've had a couple custom ones done by her, but I've asked for a new one. But yeah, so really just like leaning into the Venus, or sorry, the Pisces season. My Venus is in Pisces, and so it's sort of like, it's a very weird season for me. And it didn't help that it started with sort of like weird health news about my mom, which turned out to be fine, but it just sort of like sent everything in a weird direction. And now that we've shifted into the sun is in my eighth house, like I'm just on a different plane, thinking about deep things, shadow things, like just completely on a different plane. And so I'm not super focused, and I'm very grateful that I have such wonderful students in the semester of divination um, who can run with whatever I throw at them. And we have a great time. And I appreciate all of you here on Patreon who are willing to sort of see what I come up with. If I have a new blog post, if I don't, if I have a spread to share, if I don't, this feels like one of those months where like I'm just a little bit tapped out because of the hecticness of the previous month. Um, and also preparing for the spring season, the equinox, all of that stuff. So, that said, let me know if you need anything, if there's anything that you're curious about. I am planning at some point to either do like little mini YouTube things or get back into sample readings, like all the stuff with Instagram, um, and sort of shifting down from that space after being really ready to ramp up into it at the end of last year. Like that's also been sort of a weird slam on the brakes kind of a thing. And it's had me a little bit at a loss for what I want to create or what I need to create. And so I'm in a place of having more freedom to think about, okay, I don't need to follow this plan that I made for myself. I can sort of pull back there, redevote energy elsewhere, which has been really great since, as you can tell, my energy has been pretty diffuse and all over the place. Um, but yeah, so those are really the updates that I have been working on. Definitely surrendering to just sort of see where this the flow of things takes me. Not sort of forcing too much, and yeah, just going sort of day by day of like, okay, what are the things that I need to do? Absolutely. What are the things that I would like to do, but I'm okay to push out? What are the things that like I just don't want to do? And originally this particular video has been like pushed day after day after day, in the hope that I would like use the time that I wasn't doing this more valuably. And then tonight I realized like I've just been sitting on not doing it when like the reason why I'm so unfocused is I have all of these things to share, and I think that they're supposed to be in some sort of structure. Well, they're not in some sort of structure at the moment because I am not in a structured frame of mind. Um, and so I felt like I couldn't share them because it's this rambling mess. But there is something authentic and tied to my real feelings about being in this mess, which maybe is valuable. That's what the card said, at least. So, uh, again, hopefully I remember to actually share that spread with you all. Let me just share it in this video real quick in case it takes a while to upload and then I just forget. The spread is called The Cave, and um, you can pause the video. Um, but the idea here is you would have some sort of guiding card if you would like, right? This X in the corner. It kind of looks like a cave, kind of looks like a hermit lantern. That was the intention behind it. But yeah, you know, my guiding card, what I pulled, because I didn't actually have a question, I was just sort of in this weird space, was the reversed Eight of Wands. And I decided that that meant my like complete lack of focus. I like all of that Mercury and Sagittarius, just ADD, undirected energy moving quickly. Um, what do I need to know about, or what do I know to be true about this situation based on my actual experience? I pulled the reverse Ten of Cups for that. And so that was sort of like, oh, I'm not sharing emotionally. The tens for me are really transitional. Um, they end a cycle, but they are numerologically a one and a zero, if you want to include zero. And so they sort of kick things off. You share what you have collected in the 1 through 9 when you get to the 10. And so I haven't been doing that, right? I wasn't sharing those emotions. Why am I being reminded of this? I got the Two of Cups where it's like, oh, okay, you need to have this connection. You need to share that. That's important to you. It's important to other people. There's something valuable here. I mean, I was in therapy for the last 2 years about my sort of like lack of emotional affect and willingness to share emotions with people in my life. So probably need to go back to therapy after a little bit of a pause. But right, like why am I being reminded of this? That was sort of helped me understand that Ten of Cups in reverse. And then the rest didn't necessarily matter that much. This one was the Tower in reverse, which was that sense of like, oh, there's no structure. It's just kind of a big mess. And then this one was Judgment. Maybe that was a call to the Judgment card. I was talking about Judgment versus Justice. But for me, it was really about like, oh, this idea that like, oh, you really need to have a purpose, right? It needs to be intentional and called up. It needs to be, whatever. And I realized combining this, the tower, and this judgment, it was very much like structure doesn't matter. Just like say the thing, get it out. It no longer has to be like rattling around in your brain if you do that. I was supposed to write a newsletter today and I was going to include a lot of these points and I just decided I didn't want to. Um, and so we have this video instead. Um, what can I do to next validate? That was the Nine of Pentacles. I don't think any of this is relevant to that, or that that is relevant to this. What can I next do to validate or refute this belief about judgment? It was the reverse Six of Cups, which I often think of as like past life work. So again, not necessarily related to this. That's deeper sort of emotional wound stuff that I need to be thinking about and doing for myself outside of the context of this. Um, and what do I need to explore further before making a more informed decision? I have totally forgotten what I pulled for that. But the point about this was this helped me see sort of what my issue was, which in this case was complete lack of focus, just monkey mind all over the place. These cards helped me understand the importance of sharing emotion, uh, and that these ones were sort of saying like it's okay that it's a mess, and then the other stuff is more sort of deeply personal for me to um, be thinking about further. Man, I really need to also try to remember what was this card. I feel like it was a sword of some sort. Maybe the Ace of Swords. What do I need to explore further before making a more informed decision? Well, there wasn't really much of a decision to make since we're talking about lack of focus. But I will end it here. And yeah, I hope that something in this has been helpful or given you an idea. Hopefully, if nothing else, the idea that like each tarot card is a book is a useful way of understanding like you're not going to find just one meaning, right? The meaning's going to slip out of your hand sometimes. You're going to find it. It's going to make perfect sense. It's going to be the right meaning for the situation. It's going to be completely the wrong meaning for a situation uh, because there are all of these different layers and they all can be accurate, but it really depends on sort of like who's reading the card when, right? And what kind of meaning are they looking for? Or are they just looking for a good time, right? Which is another way of reading the cards. So that's plenty from me, twice as long as I expected it to be, but good to talk to you. Talk to you later.